we've come to have a look at an aerial installation on a vehicle, and here it is. Now, I'd consider this aerial installation to be bovine excrement. Out here we've got fresh air. Over there we've got a ground plane. Now, we know from our VSWR experiment that when you shift an aerial off to the edge of a ground plane, you end up with a VSWR of 3.2, 3.3, something like that. Basically terrible. And that's with the antenna tuned to the correct length. So let's just check this one, because this one looks like it's another one of those bolt-on type installs. And we'll just get the tape measure out. We know that this antenna is supposed to be used in the forestry. And let's have a measurement here. Yep. You might not be able to see it on film, but that antenna is close to 600 high. Here's the tip of the antenna, right up next to 600. So this antenna hasn't been tuned. That tells me that the person who installed this antenna had no idea what he was doing. So an antenna tuned to the correct length will have and positioned out on the edge of a ground plane like this, will have a VSWR of 3.2. An antenna which is not even tuned, the person who installed this probably didn't know or couldn't be bothered, the VSWR is going to be worse. Now, this is Pacific. This is made with Pacific components. We'll have a closer look at it. And just a gentle hint here to Pacific. Perhaps if you're supplying components like this, particularly where the person you're supplying them to has no radio qualifications or no radio experience, it may actually prove beneficial to give them some training. And what's really amusing about this? That's what's really amusing about it. Here's another terrible aerial install. This one I discovered in a public street, and unfortunately the passing vehicle traffic and barking dogs, in addition to the terrible wind noise, made the audio on this sequence unusable. I'll show you just enough of the company identity on the door to give you an idea that, again, this vehicle is one which is used to service the forestry industry. And you'll see from the video that I've measured the antenna and it's over length. Again, it's not tuned. And again, this aerial's installed, and we'll pause it just so we can have a good look at it and discuss it. Again, the aerial's made up of Pacific antenna components, and the antenna's installed in probably the worst location possible. So if I was giving this antenna installation points out of 10, I'd probably give it 1. You can see from the installation that it's actually a quarter, what's supposed to be a quarter wave, designed for the EN band, the forestry band, which means the whip is supposed to be 500 millimeters tall, roughly, and should actually be mounted in the middle of a ground plane. Now, in this location we don't have a ground plane behind the antenna, we've got fresh air, so that's a fail. The antenna is not to length, it's over length, it's a bolt-on install, take it out of the packet and bolt it on, probably with zero understanding of how antennas work. But worse than that, this antenna doesn't have a ground plane on the opposite side. It's not mounted on the side of a ground plane. You'll notice the adjacent metalwork, which runs parallel to the whip section of the antenna. So this antenna has no ground plane at all. It's not half ground plane, it has no ground plane. And worse, it has a reflective surface off to one side, which is going to make the VSWR of this antenna absolutely terrible. And the body of the cab itself is actually going to shape the radiation direction of the RF leaving this antenna. Once again, I'm seeing more and more of these, and I don't quite know why. A bit of a hint to Pacific antennas. Because of the radio training in New Zealand is as bad as it is at the moment, in fact it's probably almost non-existent at the moment, if you're going to supply antenna components into the industry, can I strongly recommend that you supply some training as well. This kind of installation with your components brings your components into disrepute, because the performance of this antenna is absolutely, will be absolutely terrible. If I was going to have a stab in the dark, we know the VSWR is going to be worse than 3.2. So the performance of this antenna, well, it's going to have a penalty of at least 25%. But based on the previous experience we had, or the previous VSWR experiment we did. But because of the adjacent metalwork here and the fact that this antenna isn't tuned to length, I would say that the VSWR of this antenna is probably going to be in the order of 5. And if whoever's installing these antennas up here keeps doing this kind of thing, eventually they're going to bring your product into disrepute. Anyway, just another case or an example of bovine excrement.